Welcome to It's Alive, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, to talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with the people who are making it all happen. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in a society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. We don't have any special guest today. We're just here. I'm here with my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth. We're also co-founders of Comingle. They're here as the UBI guy and Comingler One. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. Josh, do you want to tell people what Comingle is all about?
Comingle is a money-sharing app that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. And the result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without income. And you can learn all about it at comingle.us.
Thanks, Josh. Conrad, do you want to add anything?
This was normally the time when I would talk about the crowdfund campaign, which is ongoing. We haven't put a lot of energy into that after it was a successful campaign that still sits open. So if you want to give to it, it's on Indiegogo. And it's in the comments and all the different ways. I put a comment in the thread of all the different ways you can get involved or follow along. But yeah, what I would say is that from that crowdfund, we raised enough money to give ourselves, 5 or 6 months of runway on development. So we're back on track to launch this thing hopefully by the end of this year, and we'll keep you all apprised as things come along. So far, we're just digging back into the software development, and it's fun.
Great. So usually this is the portion where we just talk a little bit about recent news and then go to our guest. But today we don't have a guest, so it's one of those times where really our guests are our listeners. So anyone who wants to chime in based on the stuff that we're talking about, feel free to do so this hour instead of the second hour like we usually do. And instead of just like talking about a whole bunch of news, up front, I think maybe it would just be good where there's just certain things I think would be good to discuss in the news, and we can just go like one at a time through it, and it can like help seed discussion, and we can go from there. So I think to start off, the thing that really a piece of news that came out recently, and this isn't directly about basic income, it's not basic income news per se, but the news, like, it just really basically pissed me off, and it just, to me, shows it's a good example of the need for basic income. And the news was that Nebraska's governor decided to essentially like turn down $18 million in federal funding to help feed low-income kids during the summer when school is out. And so this is $18 million in federal funding. It's to the state of Nebraska would only be like like a couple $100,000 from them, because the administration of this program would be half state and half federal, and then like all the funding for the program is federal. And he just turned it down for political reasons. So this is, he wants to appeal to those who like it's a good thing to actually make it harder for kids to eat. You get to show your conservative values by saying that somehow, and that's just like the reality of this is that you have these politicians who get to control these conditional welfare programs, and it's a lot easier to attack a program that is only for a few certain people, in this case low income kids, and during the summertime, because it's not a universal program. It's not something where everyone expects to get this, and there's just always this political aspect to these decisions. And so basic income says, no, let's remove the middlemen from this power. Like, you don't, we're just going to make sure that money goes directly from the federal government to the bank accounts of people universally. And when you do that, you skip right over the ability for politicians to say, no, I want the money to go here instead. Like, I want to fund this program, or I want to cut these people's taxes, preferably the people who fund by campaigns, which is the way things usually work. Like, it really helps reduce this amount of just corruption and political gaming of existing programs. So I think just like starting from there, I think would be.
I mean, that immediately makes me think of something we hear a lot, which baffles me, which is a complaint about or prediction about UBI, which is that you're setting up a state of dependence upon which the government can now manipulate us, or with which they can now manipulate us, that they can come and take it as they choose or turn it into a social credit score situation, and it'll be this weird dystopia.
Right.
And what they're describing is what we have now. What they're describing is not basic income. A basic income, by definition, is something that is unrestricted in how it can be used, and it goes to everyone. There is no wiggle room in the definition of a basic income for, like, some politician gets to decide what you have to do to earn it. And so they're arguing with UBI by saying, hey, I don't like not UBI. So that's why I don't like UBI, because I don't like not UBI.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't really even have that discussion. It's like, we first have to make clear, I think, or much more clear, what UBI is, because people are arguing with what it isn't. That's an endless headache, I think.
Yeah, exactly. By definition, basic income is a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement. Like, that is part of the definition. There are no behavioral conditions on this. And not only is it unconditional, but universality protects the unconditionality. And that's the point, like, I try to get across to those who believe in this, oh, this is a program to control us kind of thing. And it's like, well, not only is it a program specifically opposed to that, as saying this is unconditional cash, but also the fact that everybody gets it means that it's so much harder to actually mess with. Like, I bring up Social Security as an example of this, where you look at Social Security, you look at welfare programs, you look at, like this program that we're just talking about as far as, low-income kids food program. That is a very small percentage of people, and yeah, you can mess with that. When it comes to Social Security, everyone expects to get this when they reach the age where they can start getting it. Everyone expects it, and this is always something where you see people attacking the other side politically, saying they're the ones that want to take away your Social Security. No, not us. They are the ones that want to take away your Social Security. Like, this is such a protected program that it's damaging politically to be perceived as someone who wants to get rid of Social Security.
Hard to demonize. It's hard to be like, look at all those stupid, lazy old people, and you're like, well, gee, Chuck, I plan to be old someday myself. I don't want to be old forever. The biggest weakness is just that it's set up in a way that is sort of like an investment structure where we're not sure if the money's going to be there. So it's easier to attack it as like it's as an unstable system. Which is one of the things I like about UBI is it can be much more easily designed to be like pay as you go. The money that comes in goes out. there's no like, is it gonna be there? It's just a flow. It's like a mechanism of flow. But yeah, you can't. As hard as it is to demonize the elderly, it's even harder to demonize everyone. You know?
Yeah, yeah, it's and also like I just watched the clip this morning that's again directly related to this stuff. This is Alex Jones' recent clip that I shared talking about how basic income is part of this conspiracy to control us. He referred to it and with other plans as turning us into domesticated animals like pigs, and like that's all. It's so much nonsense where you're also basically saying that every person on Social Security is a domesticated animal. Like, does that even make sense to claim? Like, are seniors somehow being more dependent on government from the fact that the income is coming from the government? Does that make them somehow enslaved? Does it make them somehow controlled? Does it make them somehow more likely to agree with whatever the government tells them? Like, no, not at all. The opposite is true. Social Security, when people are on that, when seniors are a powerful voting bloc, they're the ones who get all this stuff. Like when they want an improvement to the healthcare system, they get like a new Medicare program, and everyone else can want that, but they don't get that. Like, they are the ones that have this solid foundation of the under them, and they use that. They vote more. The government responds to them. Like this idea that dependency on government is somehow like disempowering is the opposite. When you depend on the government for an income because like with Social Security, you make sure that you vote, like you have skin in the game, and um, you will hold politicians to account. And we also see that in Alaska too.
I do think though that underlying these complaints, which are, I think they're finding difficulty expressing what the real fear is here, is there's an acknowledgement of how politics often works, how policy often works. It's these levers that can be used for control and manipulation, and UBI, and just kind of like reminding people that the definition of UBI is contrary to that isn't enough to allay those fears. I think it has it. It's incumbent upon us to make sure when we're designing a UBI or proposing a policy that it is structured to actually be a UBI and not be a UBI in name only. Like we've seen that in the movement where all this energy came into the UBI, and what I would say, like the guaranteed income movement as it exists today, is not UBI. It's more like TANF 2.0. It's like there's an idea that they're starting from that direct cash is good, but they're like kind of like leaving some really important stuff on the wayside. And it's in some ways adding to the confusion of the public. It's in some ways not teaching us what we want to know about basic income. It's making it less, practical and useful in terms of turning into policy. So the question I think it begs for me is like, how do you actually set up a UBI so that it behaves like a UBI? And one of the things in my mind is like this North Star UBI would be, first of all, it would be pegged to a moving target. It wouldn't be like the fight for 15 or whatever the poverty line that we have to agree on once every year what it is and fight over. It would be like, no, a percentage of GDP or prosperity or mean income or something like that. That there is no ability to question it over political reasons. And similarly, I think it would need to be codified into the Bill of Rights to be like fully safe. Everyone has a right to this. There is no like political mechanism outside of a supermajority vote to just get rid of the policy. There is no legal recourse for manipulating people with it. It just is a right. And if those things are codified in the way they need to be, which is a significant political lift to get there, then it does have a much more feasibility of living up to the idea of what basic income is, and making the case that that's what it needs to be. Invites a lot of like, oh, you'll never get that to happen, and yeah, we have to go through a lot of steps to really get it that strongly enforced. But I do believe that what you pointed to earlier, Scott, that essentially it's empowering people from the very beginning. And so fucking with it is hard to do when it is a mechanism that makes people stronger. You know, like it would essentially be political suicide that you'd have to narrative your narrative your way out of with some sort of magic to say, we're going to take this money away from this check that you get every month, and we're going to make you agree with it. Right? It has its own built-in resilience as a policy.
Yeah, and that's also an important aspect of like I agree with what you're saying as far as like optimal stuff. Like I would love to have basic income enshrined as a amendment in the Constitution, for example. Like that would be absolutely the best. But I do think that just focusing on like, the actual definition being no means test, no work requirements, like universality and unconditionality. Like those two aspects, I think, are just pivotal to this. So anyone out there who's listening to this, who's like worried about the, control mechanism stuff and strings and CBDCs and stuff instead, like all of these things, if you're worried about that, then the concern shouldn't be about basic income. The concern should be about making sure that the basic income is basic income, as we said before, that those aspects are the most important stuff. And I hope that people eventually start seeing that, because it's really frustrating as people going against, like I said, not UBI, when they're under the misapprehension that it is UBI. Like these, it's important to know the definition to actually fight for what it should be. And if you do that, then there will be responses and that help protect it. Like again, like with Alaska, I think it's a good example of how the former governor just unilaterally decided to reduce the amount of the checks. So people were expecting, say, $2,000 and that year, and he's like, no, we're going to lower those to $1,000 because I'm looking out for the long term, fund, making sure that I can continue paying these amounts forever, and we don't want to risk this. And also, of course, the under, like the kind of unsaid component of this was that he wanted to use the money for other things, than those dividend checks, and so that gets into this ability of politicians to divert funds. And so the mayor or the governor did have that ability, like they can make these kinds of decisions, but there are political blowback repercussions. And that's exactly what happened, where he did that, sure, and the check was smaller that year, but then it was political suicide. That's exactly how it ended up
Now he
happening. He
works at
essentially
McDonald's.
got fired. So then it was great to see the next candidates when it was time to get a new governor in there. First of all, he couldn't run; it was just impossible, and the other candidates were all like basically arguing over how to best go about increasing the dividend and protecting it from any kind of this nonsense again.
Yeah.
So like the blowback is
I
important.
think one thing that I'm resolving myself to or whatever is that this fight will be a narrative fight for a long time, like until some form of it can be enshrined that is like resilient and not manipulable. There's going to have to be a lot of like people saying, see, UBI failed, and no, that is not UBI. That is essentially welfare as we know it. Like we need to keep having. We'll need to keep having that argument and clarification and definition. Like a lot of the holes I get seeing poked into UBI in general is, like I said, poking at not UBI, and so we have to make it very clear that's not UBI. And like the way the term gets thrown around is a very casual and it's a very chaotic narrative space. So it's definitely a challenge, and the sooner we can get something in that I think lives up to the standards of what would make something a basic income, the sooner we can point to that. Like if, and to me, it's not about the amount of the income so much as the structure and the universality. So that's why I always go back to the carbon tax and dividend. If it were really structured, like everyone gets the exact same dividend based on this funding source, and we built a federal bank to get it to everybody, we could point to that and say, no, that is what a basic income is. Whatever you're talking about is different because, and then and make it clear with a real physical, real world example.
Yeah. But this discussion started with the news out of Nebraska that the governor is cutting this program that would help low-income kids eat during the summer. And I don't want to leave out the fact that the governor of Iowa also did the same thing. So this is both Iowa and Nebraska's governors are guilty of doing this. And Iowa's governor also said, quote, "An EBD card does nothing to promote nutrition at a time when childhood obesity has become an epidemic." And so that quote, too, I just want to get into just a little bit, because that's it's misinformation that and it's feeding into this myth of this that those in poverty deserve it, that they make these stupid mistakes, and it's just not what this shows. Like even saying that somehow food stamps essentially somehow don't promote nutrition is nonsense, because I mean, of course, if you're able to have access to food, then parents are using that money to buy what they can, and if they have some SNAP vouchers versus zero, then they certainly have better ability to buy the food that they need. But also, obesity is largely this result of insufficient income. Like, we do see that if you have a small budget for food, then you're going to go for the cheapest stuff that you can. This is calorie dense. It's sugary. It's highly processed. Like, these foods are more likely to lead to obesity. And just to connect this again to the Alaska dividend, it's one of the interesting things that we've observed from the Alaska dividend is that they've measured that it has reduced childhood obesity. And they're able to measure that just based on the timing of it. So if you're, depending on where you're born, if you're born right next to the distribution point, then you have to wait essentially a whole year for the money. And if you're born right afterwards, then you have that money immediately that you can use for the next year, for your kid's first year. And so essentially you can look at kids who have that dividend, that UBI, that during their first year of life, and you have kids that essentially don't have that dividend their first year of life. And the difference is that there's less childhood obesity in that group that has the UBI. So it is counterproductive for any politician to be against especially basic income, but even like programs like this that actually enable
That's
nutrition.
fascinating, actually. It reminds me of that Gladwell 10,000 hours thing where he talks about the Canadian hockey players, and like if you're born on one side of the year or whatever, you start a little younger, you get better competition, and like they can tell like most of the hockey players in the NFL or the NHL, were born in a few certain months of the year because of that effect from when they were children. Which kind of points to another thing that I think is a key structural element in UBI that Alaska actually lacks, is that the frequency is not frequent enough. For our bootstraps trial, we did it weekly. Because even to me, the idea of a UBI is knowing that someone's okay all the time. If someone's on the street asking for money, I want to know that it's like they might not, if they're even like 20 days away from their next basic income payment, and they lost it or blew it or had to spend it or whatever. 20 days is too long to not know. A year is even longer, right? Especially if you look at these macro effects like you're talking about on kids. Yeah, it should be like a regular heartbeat, so that income is always there. There aren't long stretches of time relative to like the human experience where you're going without and trying to figure out how you're going to make it to the next one.
Yeah, along those lines too. I'm very interested in the Kenya results showing that the lump sums were so useful, like surprisingly so. Where again, for those who don't know, the 12-year Kenya UBI pilot um, looked at three different experimental cohorts where you either got a 12-year basic income or a 2-year basic income, or you got a windfall equivalent to the 2-year basic income. And then they looked at those first 2 years. And that was what the recent, the first research paper was looking into, like what were the results of that. So interesting to even divide it up that way, how you could look at the 2-year versus the 12-year, and those two are equivalent in the first 2 years, except for the fact that 12-year is expecting to receive it for a lot longer. And then, of course, the lump sum group is just getting this one-time thing that they don't expect to ever get ever again. But it was also universal. So you have an entire village of hundreds of people in this village, and no matter what, they each got the same lump sum, and it was just surprisingly effective for that lump sum, at least in those first 2 years. And I don't know what that means yet. I do think so. A couple things on the one hand, it does show that like maybe it is better to have, say, monthly versus weekly or biweekly, because it's more like a lump sum instead of broken up in little parts. I don't know if that's the case yet, but also on the other side of this too, the amount in the Kenya pilot was so small that like basically the lump sum is what we're talking about on like a monthly basis. Like we would want it to be higher. So of course the lump sum is going to be more useful. If it's, it would be like an experiment in the US looking at a 15,000 or let's see, more like a $1,200 lump sum versus like a basic income of, what would it
Well,
be,
we
like
actually got
a couple dollars a
we
day
had
or
a really
something.
good look at this with our pilot, actually. And we were always asking the participants, it was a small group of diverse people from diverse backgrounds, because that's the other question you have is like, okay, this is a village in Kenya. Their economy is one thing that's different than mine, maybe not even something I understand very well, so it's harder to assess. But across the US economy, we wanted to see like what different people thought in different situations, right? And a lot of it depended
Mhm.
on people's relative level of security, right? We had people from homeless to middle class. And the less secure you were week to week, the more beneficial the amount was. It also depended on the frequency was. It also depended on, what you wanted to do with it. Like if you had investments in mind, you were ready to get going. You don't want to slowly save up, right? You're ready to do a thing. But at the same time, you have to balance that against like the ongoing security. So one of the guys we had was a guy who's sort of stuck down in North Carolina, former coal miner from middle Rust Belt area, like West Virginia, and he wanted to get out for a while. He couldn't afford to. He'd have to like pack up his chickens, find a new place. So it was a hard move to do. And we were doing $1,000 a month for him on a weekly basis, $231 a week. And he was like, man, I wish I could have that first $1,000. I could do my move. And whether or not that was true, that's how he was thinking about it, right? And that's how he felt. And we kept going back, and we've made the decision. This is how the thing's running. We have to have consistency. but we want to keep checking in with how you feel about that. So he started the pilot. He on 6 weeks after the pilot, Hurricane Florence rolled right over his house, and he had been on 6 weeks rather than 1 month and waiting for the second month. So he'd received more like $1,500 than $1,000, and he had enough money from that saved up to buy gas and go inland, take his possessions, take his things. He'd had to ride out previous things. He'd been flooded out several times. So he had the money to evacuate, but also he spent the money to evacuate, and he similarly, it seemed like he would have spent $1,000 in a similar way and taken more stuff, but he was essentially stuck inland for a week instead of 2 weeks or a month or whatever, because he had the money that following Wednesday to then get some more gas and come back. And so as we kept going, like the more dire his circumstances or immediate his circumstances, the more beneficial it was for him to have this ongoing heartbeat. And a lot of people, they got used to that rhythm. Like they would talk about it every Wednesday. I just know it's going to be there. And some of them would let it accumulate and just take it when they need it, or they direct it to another account. Some of them were like, the second that comes in, that's cash in my pocket, I'm cashing it out. Like it depends on your needs. But to me, these are two different sort of very fundamental needs of people, is the ability to know that you're safe at all times. You always have an out in an emergency, and also the ability to know you can invest and make some moves, take some risk. And I see them as two policies that are not contrary. In fact, I see them as like things that we need both of. We need ongoing sustenance and resilience capital, and we preferably, I would say, we need like investment capital, like a baby bond sort of a situation, where if you come out of college with enough money to decide, am I putting into a business? Am I getting a house? Am I getting a car? What am I doing? Am I getting more education? And also, however that goes for the rest of my life, I'm going to have some steady stream of income. You aren't forced to like measure the game theory between like who's going to be more strategic if you make them try to account for their whole next 10 years all at once, or you give them a lot of chances to try to cobble something together very slowly. You put both of those together, that's the combination you need to actually plan an effective life strategy.
Yeah, but when it comes to baby bonds and stuff like that, I like that too, as far as, this idea of like starting off as an adult with some amount of money. But then, we also know that there are certainly instances throughout our lives where it's going to be more useful to have a larger amount versus a monthly amount, or, something more frequent. And I like how Kenya is kind of exploring that and seeing and finding that like the 12-year UBI group is actually they're both enjoying the security and ability to get that on a monthly basis, but they're also able to voluntarily transform that through these circular lending groups, of being able to combine that together to self-create those lump sums amongst themselves. And I like how Comingle is essentially a tool that is doing, let's say, the reverse of that, where if you, let's say we actually win a monthly basic income tomorrow, or let's even go a little bit further than that, and let's say we get a carbon dividend going tomorrow, but it's a quarterly dividend. Like that's what they decided to do. It's quarterly, so everyone gets this money every 3 months. And if you have a tool like Comingle, then you're actually able to self-select and say, if you enjoy that amount, having a larger amount every 3 months, then you could do that. But also, if you want to use that to convert it downwards into a more frequent amount, then you have that ability to do that with Comingle, where it would be on a weekly basis. So like you can do either one. Like if they're with that kind of sweet spot with a monthly basis, then you can use a tool that makes it weekly or even daily or something. And also you can make it every year or something instead, if that's
In
what you
terms of
prefer.
designing something, like you can see these private or social structures pop up. In terms of designing something from a federal or governmental level, what you're trying to account for is the worst case scenarios, right? And you can see, other solutions pop up. If you're not doing both a baby bond or a yearly lump and a thing, if you're not doing it all, I lean towards the frequency, because you can see these things like these lending circles and susus pop up to fill that niche. People who are like, I don't want to collect the money that often. I like to budget on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. That hole is going to be filled by all kinds of services. I mean, we're building that into Comingle, is like just defining how often you want to withdraw your money if you're a net recipient, for example. Whereas if you build into the system, like it's going to be an annual thing, you can choose how you get it, and somebody like takes the lump and then has something really bad happen, and they're still on the street. They're still screwed because they're waiting till next year. Whereas if you're in it's coming weekly or whatever, and I have the Schwab account or whatever, the whatever Comingle thing that allows me to say, you know what, I'm going to put this into an investment pool with people, and it'll accumulate every week, and I get to take some at every certain amount of time or whatever. But if that all falls apart and you just you get hit by a hurricane, you want to know that the people are going to be able to like quickly access money, that it's not something they can't escape from, like whatever system they're tied into.
As our first guest, Ace or Andy, I'm not sure which name you go by based on your account here, but first of all, thanks for joining us and listening. And also to everybody listening right now, again, we're welcoming people to ask to invite to speak, to join on the discussion. And also as a reminder to, everyone, if you want to, share this, retweet the space, quote tweet the space, just to get more people to know that we're here, then that's great. And Ace or Andy, what would you like to add?
How do we get Bernie Sanders in coming up here?
How do we get Bernie Sanders in
Presidency.
to basic income or into
the office of president?
That's a fair question that people have been
because
working on. He's never really come out very strongly for UBI, so it's not directly related, although I had strong hopes for him for a while.
That's interesting. Has he spoken about the matter?
He has,
that you're aware of
in the past, and he's expressed openness.
Gotcha. But
it's also the sort of thing. No, it's just like not a willingness to like put his political neck out for it, is how I took it.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, well, I guess that's what we learned about him. That's his thing, I guess. I don't know. That was crazy.
I used to be very excited about him. I actually, you can find an article of mine where I tracked like each time he mentioned it, and that I put out that article in gosh, like 2016 maybe, and I was noticing that. First of all, he seemed to be getting increasingly asked about it. Like every time he did like a Reddit AMA, then someone would ask him about this, and he'd have an opinion, and he'd be asked about it like when he gave a talk somewhere, and it was really cool to see him continually kind of respond in a positive way, and it seemed to be increasingly positive. And then it reached the point where he was actually talking about it positively without being asked a question. And that was when I was like really hopeful that he really is like actually like deciding that this is something that is popular and he should be pushing. And then he announced his candidacy for president. And I think what happened is he wanted to separate himself as opposition to Andrew Yang. And because Andrew Yang was running on UBI specifically as being like a big part of his campaign, then Bernie felt that he, I don't know, would somehow assist that or not get as much interest. And so instead he started speaking in opposition to UBI and saying that we should have a federal jobs guarantee instead of a UBI. And after that point, I really haven't seen him speak positively about it. He may have said something positive about like monthly stimulus checks, I think, during the pandemic and the height of that in 2020. But I haven't really noticed him say anything about it at all since.
I had a lot of friends who worked with his campaign and stuff, and I kept trying to get in. I wrote an open letter I shared in the comments to him, and it was very disappointing. But it might have been just an exercise in learning the reality of politics. Like, he's also was pushing for universal health care. He was pushing for a lot of things that were like big asks, and he's got to make a calculation on like his odds of actually getting elected. Is how I took it. So, I never really felt like I had an understanding of his feelings of it personally, all the way. And I kind of took it as, no one's really pushing this except Yang, who made it his whole thing. And if it's going to be something that is picked up by more and more politicians in a sincere and serious way as a part of a well-rounded platform, there's a lot of organizing and grassroots work that needs to be done to basically sow the soil, or whatever they call it, fertilize the soil, and make it safe for politicians to stick their neck out. Otherwise, politicians don't lead in most cases. They follow. They listen to what the crowd wants, and they say what the crowd wants to hear. And the good ones serve. I mean, they're supposed to be civil servants, right? So if we're not putting out the signals and we're not ready as a massive population to get behind something, they're not going to do that, because it'll just ruin their chances of actually achieving anything.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy who, was there for the civil rights protests, and I think it was very impressive where, for some reason, even though, like, presently we're the only industrialized nation without some form of universal healthcare, he was able to, I think in part, he was a catalyst to changing that paradigm for the entire nation, which was pretty impressive, from Americans being like, healthcare, that's, communism, blah, 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 to, most people, I believe a majority are in support of it, and we actually passed, some form of it, I suppose. I thought it was really sad when the Democrats, stabbed him in the back, for Hillary, or whatever their deal was, for their corporate money or whatever. I think that may have been a turning point for the world, unfortunately, where the bad guys may have won, whereas, the country could have gone one way in solving the most important issue in America and in the world, which is, the lack of the constituency having a voice, and really it's all the corporations in America. We're an oligarchy basically, and getting the money out of politics, for example, and getting making the corporations not lead our decisions. That's what Bernie may have been able to do, but instead might have gotten Trump selling us, to the Saudis, or to who knows who, with his sleepovers at Mar-a-Lago, with his confidential papers, or who knows what else, horrors he unleashed denying COVID, etc. So yeah, I don't know. I was just playing around with Bernie, but I've heard you guys seen your posting a while, and I just came to hang out, and I'm interested in a job with any of y'all, with any of your projects, and in any case, I appreciate what you guys are doing. I think it really resonates with a lot of people, because it makes a whole lot of sense. So,
well, thank you.
I'm just here to hang out, and I appreciate y'all.
Thanks.
And you can hit me up.
Keep in touch, too. And as we build, like, we're still small and lean and like all working for free, but at some point when we're opening up, we'll want people to reach out to us. There's no way we're going to remember everybody. So everyone wants to follow along. We're always looking for collaborators, and whether just members or followers or supporters or whatever, but we're going to be looking for people to work with us too down the line.
I just want to add to just a little bit of defense of Bernie, and say that that he is a politician who recognizes and runs on popular policies. Like, he's a populist, and so back in the day, it would have been a decision in 2016 if Bernie had won the primary, and it would have been between a populist and a populist as far as what they were talking about and running on. And so when it, like you mentioned, how like we are one of those like the only OECD country, I believe, without universal like healthcare system. That's very popular, and so like a lot of the country actually wants that. And it may not be popular among like the donor class, And so that's the issue, is that a lot of politicians only listen to what their donors are telling them and what's popular with donors. And then those like Bernie are running for, what's popular with the people, and he needs to hear from the people what is popular. And so, like, we do need to have this strong base of support for basic income for those like Bernie who are listening to what is a popular policy. So, like, if these politicians know that there's, say, 65, 70% or whatever support for basic income, then they're far more likely to actually make sure and run on basic income because they feel it's actually has majority support. And then you've got politicians who don't care about the majority support at all. They care about what their donors are telling them, in which case we also need the donor class, those um, who are actually, who the government is listening to actually speak positively and express their support for basic income as well. So those are two different strategies, and I think both are important, depending on the politician. Okay, so next up we have crypto BI, and this is it could lead into a discussion that I actually want to get into next, potentially, and it's also kind of a follow up to what we opened up with. So um, we'll see. Or maybe he disappeared. Okay, so I guess I'm going to get into this other thing first, and if he comes up again, then we can invite him again to speak. But the news piece I wanted to get to next is the fact that Singapore recently announced like this program where they've done it a few times now, so it's not the only time that they've done it. But it's interesting that they're doing this because it's fully universal, and so it's not income, so it's more like, say, universal EBT. And so it's every household
Food stamps,
is
right?
getting
EBT's food stamps.
EBT. Yeah, is food stamps, but EBT is the mechanism through which the SNAP program is distributed. And so
Like the card.
I do think it's right, right. And so this is more like EBT in that so every household is getting $500 worth of this, and it's it's called a Community Development Council voucher, CDC voucher. And so I think people are confusing CDC with CBDC. And this is not a central bank digital currency. This is a Community Development Council voucher, which is like EBT. And I say it's like EBT because the way that it operates is this newest one. So everybody gets it. Everyone gets $500 worth of spending on this, but $250 is for food that can be spent like SNAP, and then the other $250 can be spent at small businesses that accept these vouchers on like lots and lots of things. So the like half of the amount is much more like actual money. It's just that it depends on the store accepting it or not, which again is like SNAP. Like there's lots of places that sell food, but you can't necessarily use it at that. But they've done this for a few years now. This is, I think, the third or fourth time. It started during the pandemic, and it was just popular. And they're doing it now as like to help defray the impacts of inflation, and also spur the support of local businesses, what they call, well, they're defined as hawker stalls and heartland merchants. So like really small businesses, but also like can be bigger businesses too, like a kind of a you can spend it like at your kind of a farmer's market situation at a stall in a farmer's market, and you can also spend it like at your grocery store or whatever. But the fact is that you can spend half of it on a lot of other things other than food. So I mentioned this because this is a fully universal thing, which I think is great, and it's in that kind of gray area where it's also kind of reminds me of the programs in America, Brazil, and also in Gyeonggi province in South Korea, where you get this local currency, and the local currency is usable basically as cash, but it depends on where you want to spend it, accepting it. But a lot of people do accept it, so it's this gray area where it can be seen as a step towards basic income, and then but also some people might want to stop there, and that's where those who are fearing like CBDCs and non-cash basic income, it would be helpful for them to be saying, we don't want to stop there. Like you can do this kind of thing to just help people or whatever. But as far as like a permanent program goes, we want it to be equivalent to cash, if not cash. And a voucher is not cash. A voucher you can that's where the controls come from, the limitations. That's where they say, okay, well, you can spend it on food, you can spend it on furniture, on clothing, on electricity, whatever, but you can't spend it on alcohol, cigarettes, these things that they determine are bad for you. And that's where I think the importance of basic income is making sure that it is unconditional cash, but at the same time, I do like this is fully universal, and I think that's a good thing. Did you see that in the news, Conrad?
No, I hadn't. I honestly, when it comes to the news, I keep a very peripheral glance at most of the news. That's one of the benefits of knowing exactly what you want to work on as a project. You feel like free to ignore everything else. Not so much the UBI news. I mean, I try to keep in touch with it a bit, but the stuff going on in our politics I feel like paying attention to it any more than just to have a rudimentary understanding of what's going on only creates like a level of anxiety and frustration that I'll just be like my mom screaming at CNN all day.
Yeah, well, I'm always I'm seeped in basic income news. I'm constantly trying to find stuff, so I know I'm.
Oh yeah, no, you're. I lean on you. A lot of us lean on me. It's like if it needs to be known, Scott will tell me. So I wait for these moments, and
we let you process all the angst for us. And
right,
give us
right.
the good stuff.
Yeah,
like we're off in a meeting.
So,
like, how do we make sure that if someone's bank account closes, they're still going to get the Comingle money, or like how do we get in funding for our docuseries? And it's like, and every now and then Scott will let me know what's happening in the world.
But that story gets me, reminds me of something I've been thinking about a little bit. Like, when we first, when I was first thinking about Comingle, a big part of what I was thinking about is like identifying the things that are basics. And so, the idea that, money is sort of can be specified for use on basic items. Like you can't spend it on alcohol. You can't spend it on, things that aren't necessary. It's an interesting thing to think about. Just it makes you wonder, like, what are the basic things? Like, at what point did somebody decide what those things were and say that food stamps can be used in this way? Like, that's such a complicated process, and it's just loaded down with all these value judgments. But
it's so ridiculous. Like even looking at the way WIC works. Like I posted about this before. I wrote when I included in this article that I wrote just about how insane that it gets, and it again like every program or so many programs, it varies by state, and so this puts the state politicians in charge of and bureaucrats in charge of what to include and not include, and it gets as weird as how moms with WIC can spend it on white eggs but not brown eggs.
Oh wow.
That's really weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a
It,
reason for that stated, or is it internally known to them?
Oh, like yeah, the reasoning is that, oh well, brown eggs are tend to be like organic, but not always, of course. And of course, you can't use this in general on anything organic because organic is more expensive. So and they just kind of drew that division as being white eggs are usually always the cheapest. So that's what you get, and you can't get the other stuff. And same thing with like they have these divisions with milk. So like you can't buy I believe it's whole milk, um, and the cheaper milk is usually like skimmer 1% or whatever, and like I think maybe 2% is allowed. But like these are the kinds of decisions that they are
Mm-hmm.
making. It's like
wow.
that finely grained. Same thing with like there's cheeses you can get and not get. And there's peanut butter you can get and not get. They're making all these decisions for you as far as like what you can do and not do.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with like SNAP. Like that's the thing that really bothered me when I moved to Louisiana is like I had no idea at the time. This was like 2000, it was 2009, and I didn't even know what basic income was yet. I wasn't seeped in the details of this stuff, and I just thought SNAP helped people buy food, and I was shocked when a hurricane rolls through and people are impacted, and they did the temporary reprieve of SNAP conditions, where or SNAP limitations, let's say, where you could use SNAP to buy hot prepared foods, and temporarily, and of course then that would go away again. So I remember reading these signs like in like the hot section where let's say that you would have whole chickens for $4 or whatever, and SNAP beneficiaries could use their money to buy those chickens, and they were already all done and ready to go, and cheap too. Not as cheap as buying a cheap whole chicken and wholesale and cooking up yourself. But also in many cases they can be cheaper to do that. Like Costco chickens are crazy cheap. Um, but yeah, that just really bothered me that like, wait a second, you mean they can't use it on, on these foods? Like
Right.
I had no idea at the time.
Yeah, I'd like to
Yeah.
see sorry, Josh. I just want to say quickly, I'd like to see like just a more of an absurdist, like a comedy piece about like all the ways that you could get around these. Like I'm imagining a company that's trying to, you know, angle with their cheap eggs towards that sweet food stamp market, and they're putting white out all over their eggs in an industrial process, and that's what people are allowed to buy. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been, I start off kind of thinking like, is there a way to identify things that actually are basic through data or through some like more intelligent, uh, you know, analysis of people's spending? And then I was like, is there a way to actually like just see what are the things that everybody gets? Like, is that like, to kind of identify like what a universal spending is? Like, what does everybody spend their money on? And is that some way to like, can you just use that as like the default
I mean,
like
that's kind of what they try to
method? Like,
do, but it's just so limited. Like you don't know when someone needs a
Yeah.
mattress because they hurt their back, and that's the only,
right.
or they need a thatch their roof. Is like these are examples from Kenya, or like, sometimes you need something very, very specific, but it is what you need. It's like how you're going to get through the day,
Right.
and no bureaucrat anywhere is ever going to write that into the policy that that's what you can spend the money on. So then you have all of this, like across 300 million people, now you have like people trading their food stamps for heroin, so then they can then trade their heroin for, baby formula or whatever it is, like trying to get what they need because they don't need whatever they're allowed to get.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But there are things that like we all do need, like we all need water in some way, right? We all need some kind of nutrition. Like we can't really specify what it is that like how we get that nutrition, but you do need like calories to live. There are some very basic things that as organisms we require them,
Right.
and like heat and shelter in some way, and there's just
Yeah, there are physiological needs that we can agree on. Of course, even they vary, like how someone may need 1,200 calories a day and someone else may need 3,000 calories a day based on their activity. So like it would be weird to somehow define a level of calories as being basic. And then also there's we need shelter, sure. But there's also there are a percentage of people that actually, let's say, prefer to be nomadic. Let's say they have no interest in, say, having, either renting or owning an apartment or a house. Let's say they would actually like to continually be on the move and live, a week here, 2 weeks there, and or even live out of their car, live in an RV, travel just continually, drive around the country. That could be the way they would prefer. There's people who, actually would prefer to just go from camp spot to camp spot. And, so in which case, if that's kind of the failing of the universal basic services approach that basic income actually fulfills better is if you're trying to figure out the services approach, then you have to say, all right, so housing is this basic, food is this basic, and then you're trying to figure out, to meet those. But then you're operating on the assumption that everybody, say, wants housing per se, instead of, the different ways of living, either being nomadic or in an RV or whatever. And so what about them? Why is that a bad choice for someone to prefer
Well, it's
to
funny
do?
too, that all this effort going into defining the absolute essentials and restricting to that. The beauty of and elegance of UBI is this hack around, if they are absolute essentials and you give people the ability to get those absolute essentials through cash, then it will go towards the absolute essentials. That's just what happens.
Exactly.
And then you don't have to spend all this time and money figuring out what the absolute essentials are. And you also don't miss all of the many absolute essentials that occur that you can't predict for. The hack is trust. And you have to just trust that people with a basic level of empowerment and cash will first and foremost ensure their basic essential needs, because we all need water, we all need sleep, we all need calories. That's what people are going to spend it on. That's what they do.
Yeah, that's this is an academic discussion where people will, we'll be at basic income conferences even, where you'll have someone write a paper on the basic of basic income, and there's the academic side of that, and there's the kind of popular conception side of people just looking at universal basic income and saying, oh well, basic means this. And just to touch on that, I think most people look at basic income and do come away with the initial assumption of an amount. And of course, an amount is not part of the definition of basic income. But I think people assume that in order for something to be basic, it has to be this, certain height.
That it has to cover the basics. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Whereas I think that the basic is better thought of as Conrad was saying, is somehow, let's say primary, where, it comes first, because we all have our basic needs. And so any amount of spending goes to whatever that is first, and then you start spending on your discretionary, on luxuries and these things beyond basics. But it's up to every person to decide what is primary and what isn't. And to me, that's how I would define
that's
the
a really
basic
good way to
income.
put it, in terms of the understanding the mechanism too, because when people say basic income, they see it as a top up. But when you think of it as a primary income, you can, I like to frame it, it's the first income anyone makes. We all start with it. Doesn't mean you don't get it taxed back when you make a lot of money, but it's not a guaranteed extra income for everyone. It's a guaranteed primary income for everybody, that gets you going, gets you out the door. And then beyond that, there's no guarantee about keeping all of it forever if you make a lot of money or anything.
Right. Von Doramal, thanks for listening and raising your hand to speak. What would you like to add or ask?
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I think there is an opportunity coming up for all of us basic income enthusiasts, right? So Martin Luther King is coming, the MLK weekend,
Hmm.
and whenever I would talk to a lot of, especially with this last book, right, Community or Chaos, right, and I talk about the minimum guaranteed income that's written in that book. Nobody seems to understand or know, like, wow, okay, I even got told at one point that I guess placating, that be the word, or trying to take advantage of the MLK holiday for
Hmm.
something that I would want to happen, and then I'd have to like tell that person, hey, have you read his book, Community or Chaos? And then kind of like crickets, no reply, or I got this like,
Yeah,
oh, he wrote that book. So I think okay, September is what the basic income day. There should also be a January for the MLK guaranteed minimum income opportunity that we can at least focus on a guaranteed income for at
yeah.
least twice
Well,
in a year.
there's always people
Yeah,
pushing stuff out on MLK Day, and I
yeah.
definitely feel your pain. Like, yeah, it's what he was writing about, and what he was thinking about and promoting when he was assassinated. I suspect it might have been a big part of what his poor people's campaign, rather than a very specific demographic, you know, racial justice. He expanded it to be like, this is all of us together now, and that's a very threatening thing to powers that be. And the thing that is my pain is that people in our movement, or people that sort of came in, like, took Martin Luther King's language of guaranteed income, with when he said it was talking about something universalist, with his poor people's campaign, and they used the word guaranteed so they wouldn't have to say the word universal, so they could then talk about targeted universal income, as if that weren't an oxymoron, if it weren't like some sort of strange uh, you know uh, adaptation of welfare as we know it. And it's taken a lot of the energy out of the movement for me, and it's just a bastardization of what he was saying and his legacy. It's hard for someone like me to say that, because no one wants to hear it from a white guy, but it's it's true. And I think, like, reading that book was incredibly inspiring to me, and it's like I feel connected to the deep sense of loss of the time. Like, yeah,
Yeah, because guaranteed income was almost a reality during the Nixon days, right? Which is right around where MLK got assassinated. I would even add that's why he got
well, I
assassinated.
think MLK got assassinated in what, '68, and the policy stuff was happening in the several years after that. I think
Right.
I think he was the strong organizing voice, which is the kind of thing we need now, that pushed the public to get it, or he was a big part of it anyway, and he had people pushing him to it as well. But he was a big part of the reason that it got to those levels, and I think his assassination might be a big part of the reason it never happened.
Right. Yeah. Because all of a sudden, human, rights, and all of that. That's all nice and dandy. But you're now asking for money. It's kind of like, oh, wait a minute. Time to like cut this. That's probably what happened. But that's just a conspiracy thing in me to think that way. But yeah. But so thank you for allowing me to speak, and I'll keep on listening. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Vaughn. I just also want to add that MLK. He really was doing something amazing as far as starting to when his pivot towards universal basic income. And but even then, it's not that he was like the first. And so again, this kind of goes to people doing things. And even if you're like a leader, there you need to have this base of support underneath you. And you can be like the front of this wave, but like you still have to have the wave, and like the leader doesn't create the wave necessarily. You can encourage and grow the wave, but there still has to be that amount of support there. So at the time in the 60s, there was also this widely shared letter among economists that got over 1,000 signatures from economists around the country that was in support of what they called at the time this guaranteed income. And most of it was usually, we're talking about a negative income tax variant back then. So this is something that Milton Friedman supported, and he supported it, before Dr. King, and these economists that there's a strong base of support that wasn't only among necessarily people, but this was like academic elite support too. So like this was a policy with legs, and also interestingly at the time. So we're looking at like 1969 is when Nixon proposed his family assistance program, which is a guaranteed income for families. And right before he proposed it, this pair of academics went throughout DC based on the support among economists for a guaranteed income. And they asked people, what are the odds of like this policy actually passing? Like this policy with all this support among economists, what are the odds of this actually making its way through Congress and being signed into law by Nixon? And the conclusion of the report was like, no, this is not going to happen. Like however much economists love it, this is not going to make it onto Nixon's desk, and he's definitely not going to sign it if it did. And no one knew at the time that Nixon was looking into this and was actually looking to propose it. So when he did, then that itself changed a lot of this, the possibility of it. Those same researchers went out and asked again, and suddenly people were like, "Oh yeah, no, this can pass." Like Nixon proposed it. This can happen.
There was other stuff going on too in the movement space too. I feel like this is like people either focus on the organizing, or they focus on the academia, or they focus on the politics, and forget to blend all these. That's like when we came into the movement in 2016, Day and I, what we noticed is at that time it was very academic, and it needed to have all fronts, right? So like MLK and those organizations did a lot to push it to a place where it helps the economists take heed of it, but it also forces the government to, take it seriously. What was that? Did you see that movie that was in some of the conferences and things? Storming Caesar's Palace, Scott?
Yeah.
That was and I don't know to what extent it's accurate or about like sort of giving credit to some of these women, and it was the women in Las Vegas basically that they were getting completely short shrifted by the benefits and the draconian benefits in Las Vegas at the time. And they organized a group, and they brought in Martin Luther King and convinced him on the idea of basic income, or pushed him on it. And they did a lot of politically visible things, like they shut down the Caesar's Palace Casino one day. They got a large crowd of people in there, and they shut the whole thing down and basically put the flow of the money in that business on halt, and got a lot of attention to it. And these sorts of things, I think they fuel each other. I think that's, if something like basic income is going to happen, being such a populist issue, it's like the fundamental populist issue, which is power to the people, essentially. It can't just happen through academia or think tanks, and it has to happen through all of it combined. There has to be pressure coming from all different angles.
Yeah. Even looking at other examples, both successful and non-successful, like looking at universal healthcare, I think is great, where this is something so many countries already have it, and it's proven to be very successful, and yet we don't have it, despite the fact that you do surveys around this, and people want it. It's a very popular policy, but we don't have it. And it's one of those policies where the fact that it's been around long enough actually, I think, is hurting it, because you've got these entrenched interests who are well funded and are funding politicians against this, where they really don't want it.
And they've learned how to
And when
fight
you,
it. They're trained
yeah,
against
yeah.
it. Yeah.
And then you look at a program like Social Security, and when that first came in, that came in quickly. And so, as we've talked about before, there was a base of support already, thanks to the Townsend Plan and all these clubs around the country. And you also had all these it's very similar clubs too around back in Huey Long's time, when that was the share the wealth like clubs, and that was for like a large UBI, and the Townsend Plan was for this essentially basic income for seniors, and like that was when it came to actually passing the policy, it was something that FDR proposed Social Security, and they just the part of the strategy was swiftly getting it through. And part of the strategy too, like I really like some of the graphics, like the visuals and stuff. You can see the kind of advertisements for this, where this was like a literal check, and so people could see that, and it was like, oh, that's a check for me from the
Yeah.
government. So it was both. It was popular, and the marketing was essentially saying that thing you're talking about that you like, we're going to do that. And then the political process was, all right, we got to get this through quick before like the interests form around this and start pushing against it.
That's why I really
And so, yeah, that's all goes
That's why I
together.
really like the carbon tax and dividend approach, where it's like, not only is it a small one that we could test, and like if it's not working, we can find out without there being huge, macroeconomic consequences that we didn't foresee. But also, it really is like a scalable thing where it's like we've built the system of getting money to people at a frequency, and enshrining it as like a right or whatever unconditionally. And now we have it. Why don't we put more money into it if it's working? We sneak it in the door rather than having this like sort of North Star policy proposal, which is the only thing we'll accept, which eventually the powers that be get more and more hip to like what a threat it is to the ability to have power over the general public, and gear up more and more to be able to fight it.
Yeah, any program that's universal and has no work requirements, like these programs are important for people to recognize the power of, and politicians to be okay with. Like we can't get into this letting the perfect be the enemy of good situation, where it's like no, we can't do that because it's not good enough. There's a whole lot to be said about what happened and why Nixon's plan didn't pass when he proposed it. People don't know that it passed the House twice, and it just stalled in the Senate. And there's like some people will blame Nixon and say that he changed his mind because if he really wanted to, then Nixon was very capable of getting things through, then he would have made it happen. And so they say, oh, well, it was Nixon's fault for souring. And then there's, different hypotheses as to what it was that changed Nixon's mind. But also you look at, well, why did it stop in the Senate? And, there was a key player there, which was Russell Long, who was the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. He was the son of Huey Long. And whereas you would think that since Huey Long ran on a high UBI before he was assassinated, that his son would have somehow been for it, but his son was concerned. He said, "Who will press my shirts if the guaranteed income plan passed?" He was worried
Oh
about,
my God.
as a Southern Democrat,
Yeah. It's like,
about what would happen.
who's gonna pick the cotton?
Right. So he was in a position of power, and that helped it not happen. And then also you have Democrats in Congress who were looking at this, and to them they were looking at this plan and saying, well, wait a second, this is not high enough. Like this is a sub poverty level plan. It needs to be much higher. And there was also concerns about the work requirement, where it was a work requirement, but not a work requirement, because again, this was a guaranteed income for families. And so Nixon was very strategic on Nixon's part, that he was pushing this work requirement, because he was able to say, oh, if people, don't work, then, this isn't for lazy people. Like, they won't get it. And so he was able to appeal to all those people who would be concerned about lazy layabouts. But on the other hand, because it scaled by household and went to the whole household, parents and kids, then the child amount was always unconditional. So if a parent refused to work, then the children would still get their money. So then the household would still get the money for the kids. And so when it came to, it was like conditional for the dads, and then it was semi-conditional for the moms, because if kids were under 6 years old, then it was unconditional for the moms. But if the children were over 6, then it was conditional. In which case, if mothers refused to meet the employment requirements, then the mother's portion would be removed. But again, the kids never were. So it was this really weird kind of mix of both conditional and unconditional, because it was based at the household level and scaled for everybody. But that like detail of the policy was something that was very intentional and smart strategically on Nixon's part, and at the same time was very fought against by people who I think would have been very happy with the results and could have grown from there if it had passed.
Mm-hmm. So, to clarify, you're saying it was smart and strategic by Nixon in terms of like souring the deal, or in terms of like something that?
No, I think it was a smart thing for him to do in the time where this was being pushed. It's also where we need to operate within the political paradigm where we are, and if we can get these kind of steps towards basic income, then I think it makes sense. And in which case, if it comes to I really like the enhanced child tax credit and how that removed the work requirements on the child tax credit and made it fully refundable, so that it dramatically reduced child poverty. And the question is, can that happen again? Can that be restored? Maybe it can't be in the form that it was, but maybe there's some kind of negotiation that could be had where it's again kind of a based on, let's say, the age of the kids, where it's conditional or not conditional, for the parents getting it. Like, there's ways of playing around with this where you can win some amount of unconditionality, like maybe half the amount is unconditional, and then like the half of it is conditional. These kinds of negotiation strategies, I think, could be valuable to consider.
So it's so disheartening, though, as like an engineering design sort of thinker. It's like, look, I spreadsheeted the economy and I figured it out. We just need to do this. Here's the solution. And then it's like, you have to address the real task, which is the politics, which is a million times more complicated than figuring out how to redistribute or money or make sure it's a fair economy.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't even begin to scratch the surface of the problem, which is why like with Comingle, I like how we're just like, well, fuck it. Let's just not go into that direction. Let's just build something entirely new, so we don't need to deal with the politics of the problem. Test it out and grow it and see if it works.
Yeah, certainly a valuable strategy and ability to just be able to do it directly in some way. Adam, thank you for joining us today and listening. Would you like to add anything or ask us anything?
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and hi, the UBI guy,
Conrad.
Yeah.
And Josh is Comingler.
Okay, hey Josh. So my concern is in the next coming 5 to 10 years, as AI and robotics displace people, and we enter like this post-labor economy. Because there's going to be a lot of the money controlled by even fewer people. We're looking at the reality of a few people controlling large corporations. Like this is a whole new ball game. So the question is how to transition gracefully without pain. And I'm just curious, have you thought through this coming future, and what solutions or insights do you have?
I mean, I've got one is that we're very concerned that AI is going to displace all of our jobs and that we're all going to, fall into financial ruin. But one job that AI could be very good at is helping us to figure out that very problem. And it's not even AI, just computers in general. Like kind of what we were saying before is like if we take the human frailty out of the equation, it's not a hard thing to figure out. And I think by leveraging automation to do that, I think it's putting us in a possibly very good place.
Well, it also
I like to, sorry, I just want to point out too, as part of this, Adam, we, every episode that we've had is actually available on the Comingle YouTube channel. So each time too, we cover various topics. And I know one of them we really dug into, automation, the future of work, and these kinds of things, and that. So you might be really interested too after this in seeking out that episode as well.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
I want to say too, it's like for me in terms of like what the next 5 to 10 years looks like, I have zero concerns about automation. No, I'm just kidding. It seems to me it's like if we have some sort of infrastructure in place for what UBI does, which is helping make sure everyone gets access to resources in a paradigm where like more and more resources are being accumulated by fewer and fewer people, we need a tool like that in place. And if we get too far down that path, and I would say we were, already too far down that path, but the further we get down that path, the harder it becomes to get out of the, the infighting and the scarcity sort of mindset and people battling for scraps. To me, it's like a race to get some version of a UBI in place so that when the shit hits the fan, to the extent that people are finally recognizing it, we can make a pivot rather than fight for another 20 years about, who needs to be put on austerity and who needs to be deported and who needs to be what, like, because that's where we'll go if we get the further we get down that point and the less we have an easy option. So that I'm actually very serious about the whole get like a small carbon tax and dividend or whatever funding mechanism based universalized distribution mechanism in place. Like, so if the next pandemic happens and we decide to send everyone a stimulus check, everyone's already hooked in and we can say, okay, you're going to get $1,000 tomorrow, go inside for the next 5 days so we can figure out what's happening. Or everyone's losing their jobs more and more. We need to create a way to redirect these enormous profits from these several tech companies back to everyone so that we can all keep, buying the tech and buying food for our kids. But if we don't have that in place, it becomes like a morality and values war, and like we're all demonizing each other for greed or laziness or whatever, because that's what you do when you don't have a tool to solve it. You start looking for who to blame.
Yes, except the tool that I kind of imagine would require a great deal of transparency, being able to see into the employer's, past like their bank accounts, and then also the employees' bank accounts to determine like, hey, did you really lose the job? Like, you know what I mean? That type of transparency that an automated system would need to be would require to be able to accurately redistribute
Well, whether or
funds.
not you lost a job
Yeah,
should be irrelevant. If it's a
yeah.
universalized payment going to everyone, then you take out those conditions, and all you now have to do is figure out where the money's coming from and give it to everybody, and that and balances out in the wash. Like if you give the money to everybody and then you source the money intelligently, like through the IRS or whatever, then that achieves the effective, efficient distribution. And you don't have to then like figure out who lost a job or whatever. We still will have the issue of transparency on like, how do we keep people from putting $1 trillion in the Cayman Islands, like, so that we don't have access to that money? That is a problem that needs to be solved. But it's easier to, when you have more impetus to solve it, because you have a place you're immediately going to put it that you know is effective. But yeah, that is part of the legwork of getting a functioning UBI system, is getting an effective and enforceable revenue generating system for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into like necessarily taxes and spending and where money comes from and all this, because it just goes into a whole other discussion. But I just touch upon that just a bit. But also I want to get into this this conversation that is just so popular to be had is in regards to this future where like 90% of the population is unemployed, and what do we do? And when people are thinking about that extreme situation, they're not thinking about the entire process of transition from here to there, and not only that, but also from decades ago to here. And I think what we need to recognize and make sure that's part of the discussion is that we've already been seeing automation impact our economy and our lives, since the 70s. The invention of the integrated circuit, these things like that led to the computer revolution. Like the impact has been greater inequality. That is the tendency of automation. Like as automation impacted, through industrial robots, the manufacturing sector, you saw like a lot of these middle class jobs be automated, and those people didn't like go nowhere. Like they were displaced from their jobs, and then they found new jobs, and those new jobs just for the most part paid less. They weren't as secure, weren't as something you could look at and hope to have for decades. Maybe this is something more of like a job or a contract job, more increasingly like gig labor. Like there's an inequality and insecurity impact from automation that has been happening for decades and will continue. It'll potentially be accelerated by AI, but it's not that we're going to be entering this situation where like everyone is unemployable in a very short amount of time. It's that there will be a greater concentration of incomes and wealth towards the top, with it being harder and harder for people to, scrape on by and find any amount of security in their lives. So when it comes to basic income, like it really is important to have this floor that protects people and make sure that if they are displaced, then during that displacement time, they aren't only relying on the unemployment insurance system, that they actually have a firm base underneath them and to help them find whatever the next thing is and to add to the income of whatever their next thing is. But also it should be seen as like this dividend that we all deserve, from the fact that we helped train the AI. It was our data, it was our information, and a dividend should be distributed universally, just like it is in Alaska. They see that as a distribution of their shared returns on capital, and we should see this kind of UBI in the face of automation as a distribution based on our the capital that we provided to make it all possible.
I also see it as like a dividend, like an inheritance on previous generations of inequality, right? Every generation, you generate wealth across the generation on average, but it's unequally and unjustly in a lot of cases distributed. And so like the bottom, what percentage of the population has no entitlement to any sort of intergenerational wealth, because there's no wealth to pass down, because like you read that Time article about how $50 trillion over the last 50 years was essentially because of the power dynamics of the market and the labor market and the economy, was siphoned out of the lower classes to the top 10 or 1% or whatever. And it's like,
Right.
it's a redistribution of unjustly distributed money in an ongoing basis, but it's also it's a dividend on, how this country's prosperity as a whole was built not just on the backs of, job creators and innovators. It was primarily built on the efforts of all of the people who worked for them, who had all of their money siphoned away for a very long time.
Yeah, it's such a good thing to bring up with the $50 trillion. Like, there's just, I constantly point that out as being, where does the money come from? And it's like you look at this giant gap between productivity and wages, and the fact that $50 trillion was essentially redistributed upwards and concentrated at the top. Like, had inequality not increased, then we would all be receiving about $1,300 per month right now. And it's also, that should be what it is right now. And the only way to actually do that is through a UBI. Like, we cannot make it so that suddenly all wages match what they should be based on if that had not happened. Like, you can't suddenly make it so that every single job out there has a much more bargaining power and greater wages and contracts. There's no restoring unions to what they were, before all of that happened. And even if it was possible, you still wouldn't successfully distribute that spending to what it should be. And it's just crazy how much inequality has increased, and how if we distributed $1,300 per month UBI right now, inequality could potentially go back to what it was in the 70s. So it's like that's important and good, but also that it wasn't like we were at maximum, equality optimization back in the 70s either. But it would make a huge difference, and it just goes to show how far we've gone in those short decades, and how greatly inequality has increased in that shorter time. And where is besides like the Occupy Wall Street movement, there really hasn't been any kind of mass movement and uprising around the just ridiculous, absurd amount of inequality and concentration that we've seen.
Yeah, and it says people get hung up on the word inequality. I put the article in the links, by the way, the Time article for people who want to read. Pretty eye-opening. But in this idea that like they fight back and forth about we can't have any inequality, or like people, on one side will say, like act like you're pushing for equal outcomes for different levels of effort and whatever and talent. It's like inequality is something that makes sense to have. It's about the level of inequality. Is it justified? And you cannot justify infinite inequality, which is basically what we're getting to when we're talking about people with $100 billion. You can't justify that. And when we're talking about people who, work 60 hours a week and can't feed their kids, if
society cannot function with that amount of inequality. It just
if
can't.
You put outcomes, if you put the variables of outcomes, of inputted effort, and of amount of resources accessible in sort of an equation, the math doesn't add up. Basically, it's a question of how do we. So when it comes to automation, if we're having more and more wealth concentrated in fewer hands, and at the same time as this automation is theoretically making it easier to produce goods and resources or get them to people, then it's like things are moving in directly opposite direction of the way they should be. Whereas the more technology allows us to deliver goods and services and privileges and power to people, the more it should make it easier to access those. That if we have more resources to share, we should be able to share them better. And UBI is a mechanism for making that true. And the labor market as we have it doesn't currently have a mechanism like that, other than just like kind of narratives about meritocracy.
Yeah, we just have fictions and myths and stuff. And
coping mechanisms is what they are. They're not redistributive mechanisms. They're just like rationalization mechanisms. Yeah. Blame mechanisms.
Yeah. Crypto BI. Yeah, we tried to get you up here last time, and it looks like there's an issue. But thanks for joining us. And do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me up,
Thanks.
and thanks for all you do, all you guys. Scott, I read everything you put out. Conrad,
Oh, thanks.
good stuff. I actually I used to go by UBI guy on Discord, and you're UBI guy on Twitter. So
I got it on
that's
most
amazing.
things. I think I had to ask someone for it on Instagram, and they were nice enough. But I was like, I'm gonna. This used to be the account for our docuseries, and someone was like, "We're
Yeah,
not ready for you to have a public profile because you're making us look too small fry. We're not gonna be able to sell the project. So change it to something personal." So that's fair.
I will. I will for sure. I
Oh,
did.
thank you.
Um, anyways, Noak from Canada up here, and I was that Josh from Comingle?
Yeah.
Okay, so I totally agree with your statement before that. Let's just try and build something, something that we don't have to ask politicians about. I mean, we have to work with politicians as well. In Canada, we've got something called UBI Works, and we try and do as much as we can with convincing politicians that UBI is the right thing. But while waiting for them, what I did, I started my corporate job 3 years ago because I wanted to really focus on UBI. And my thing happens to be that I like blockchains, and I think that every blockchain should have a UBI protocol. And that would be small, but with a lot of different inputs, a lot of different UBI programs, we might actually make it into something significant. My concern or question right now, there are so many different programs out there, small and little and obscure and unheard of. So I'm working on a project on the side that I call like UBI Finder. And right now, obviously, with my background, it's focused on blockchain stuff, finding blockchain UBI programs and help people sign up for them, help people find them and then sign up for them. I was wondering if, in the dollar world or the fiat world, you think that there would be value to have something similar? Or, my concern is most of these programs are very geographically limited, and when they go live with one of the mayors for UBI or whatever, they already have a target market and they know how to find them. But I know that there are a couple of fiat-based programs like Meine Grundeinkommen in Germany. There's UBI for All, and there are a couple of them. So do you think there'd be a value for me to add the fiat-based programs there too, or do you see a challenge? Do you have any comments or to
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great. I don't. I think it's a pretty small list, but unless you start including the pilots, which basically count, I think. And I don't know if there's like a searchable database. There's not a good compilation of all the programs that. I know Scott keeps a pretty long list, but I think it's just a list if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, some sort of like real centralized place to see what's happening and all the different efforts being made would be really valuable.
And the efforts are like you said, very targeted and localized and temporary. And a lot of times you find out about them after they've already done like the planning stages and the call out and then selected the people, like the 100 people in that area. So it's not like something you can be like, I'm interested in getting a UBI. I'm going to go on this search and find the one that's applicable to me.
Right, but just in terms of like being able to like see what the data was, what the results were.
Yeah.
I mean, like I don't think that it's all kind of just hard to find and it's tucked away.
It is,
and yeah, some way to
so
bring it forward.
there are some things like basicincomeacademy.com is one, so people can check that out, where that was meant to be, or that is meant to be a kind of central tool, and even distributed, where people are welcome to add the stuff to it. That, and I know there's others being developed as well. But as far as like adding, fiat to like kind of blockchain lists, I think that's valuable. Like what really is all that much difference between like a blockchain based distribution that uses like a stable coin of like USDC or something versus one that issues dollars. That certainly there's a lot of overlap there. And yeah, if you're looking to just enable people to sign up to as many things as they can, then that certainly helps along those lines, for people to know that there's all these different programs that are potentially out
it's
there.
just a different sort of signing up. Like if you're signing up for all these crypto things, like you're actually joining the pool and you're getting mana and you're getting circles and you're getting like little, you're being involved as like a participant. Whereas for these local pilots as they exist, you can sign up to like follow along with the news and stuff. But that's the big incentive for why we're creating Comingle, actually, is to give a sort of a hub for anyone who wants to join a basic income program to just join it and be part of like a larger scalable thing. That's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah. And have
Yeah.
a permanently open window. So like that's I try to share every guaranteed income pilot that like starts up, and they say, oh, we're accepting applications, and they usually accept applications for a couple weeks or a month or 2 months or whatever. But it's always like a closed window, and sometimes you don't even see it until after it's already closed, and then it's done. But yeah, with programs like Comingle, then there's the potential there to you hear about it for the first time, and you can immediately sign up, and there is no closed window.
Right. It's a very different niche we're trying to fill. Like early on when we were trying to describe this, people would say, oh, you need to be like, these AidKit or Steady or whatever, Give Directly, like that run these pilots that are like tailored and targeted to areas. But we talked to them, and it's like they recognize as well as us that we're filling a very different niche. We're not actually doing like a small demonstration. We're doing something scalable, like a governmental model, where like Brittany at AidKit said, she was describing to me like the process of first choosing if a local pilot is something that they as a company can justify taking on. Like, is it enough funding? Is it enough people? Can they handle the logistics or whatever is that the people running the pilot want to have? And then they decide to take the thing, and then they make a call out to the local area or the local interest group or the people that are allowed to qualify. 10,000 people apply, they get to take 100 of them and tell the other 9,900 sorry. And it's devastating every time. And you focus on like what you're learning and the good you're doing for people who are getting it. But the niche that we're trying to fill is not that 100 out of 10,000. It's that 9,900 out of 10,000. And, Brittany said to me, I would love to be able to, instead of saying, so sorry, please follow along, to those 9,900 say, I'm sorry, please follow along. And also you can be part of this right now, and link them over to us. So it's just a completely different thing we're trying to offer in the marketplace, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So, Scott, did you have a list that you could share, or is that public already?
Oh, you mean like a list of all the pilots?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Josh mentioned that you might have one.
Yeah, it's basicincomeacademy.com is one of them. I'll share that in the replies, and also there's a great Mashable article that also covers most of the pilots, and they're updating that article too. So even though it was written a while back, then they're adding stuff to it. So it's a good article to refer to, and I actually added it to my my most recent blog post about the top 10 basic income articles of last year, and that made the list because it is a great resource for knowing just all the lots of different pilots.
Perfect.
Do you work with UBI Works, CryptoBI?
I'm one of their hang-arounds, if you will. I'm not.
No, they're friends. I mean, old friends with Floyd. He like helped get a lot of these projects off the ground from the very beginning.
Yeah. No, I've talked to Floyd several times. Yeah.
It's a cool group. I like what UBI Works puts out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a space with Floyd too.
Yeah. Have you been on fairshare.social?
No.
that one's it's a good Discord group right now. But that's with Philip Rosedale, who was the guest last week, is doing something there that you should probably check out.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Great.
All right.
Thanks
a lot. We got one more. Well, we got a bunch of requests coming in. Okay.
Yeah, and some of me, each time I uplift them, then they like lose their connection. So hopefully this.
It's the bot people. All right.
Vaughn Dormo, do you? Thank you for listening, and you're up next.
Oh yeah, one other thing, just quick. So so the best thing, one of the core competency of the federal government is to give out money. So I think they should do that. You know. Okay. Here's the other part of it. When you talk about the academic side of kind of like basic income and all that stuff, has there been a talk between the difference between supply side economics and demand side economics as as a shift in economics to where giving people money is much more palatable, saying, hey, this will grow the economy and things like that, instead of what is currently believed to right now is, hey, if you give people a lot of money, the economy will not be as good. So I'm going to turn my mic off.
Definitely a recurring theme in the space. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, or supply side, a lot of people, or it got, I guess, negatively connotated as trickle down. That's how most people know it. To the point where it was accepted so much that the more right leaning people accept it as the actual term and don't remember that it was sort of a jab. They kind of embraced it, but yeah, it kind of makes sense to me in general. I'm not deeply academically educated on it, but you know, money in the consumer's pocket means opportunity to, you know, build the economy much more than money in the company's pocket to try to decide how they're going to then use it to then entice more customers. It's just too many steps. You know, businesses and profits are driven by consumers. They're not driven by the business. That's just kind of how it works. So the most.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's problematic to begin with, just that there's somehow a difference between the suppliers and the demanders. Like, they're all just people. There's no like. I think having that distinction is maybe causes more problems than we need. You know, it makes the continuity between the consumer and the business somehow like unrelated, like they're distinct. There's a line, you know, but there's no line.
Well, yeah, we make them be the same person. Like, you know, you have to be, in order to express demand, then you have to have a job. And of course, you can't have a job unless other people are expressing demand. And so, you know, that's a real issue to actually say, okay, well, you actually have to meet someone's demand first before you can express your own. That's all like backwards. Like the economy really needs a way to issue demand to everybody, to express that demand, and then people can find ways of earning extra income to express more demand.
We basically turned off like a big chunk of the market by not giving it the access to vote with its wallet, right? So now the supply side is competing for a portion of the potential market and the demand signals that could be out there.
Yeah. JB,
we got 3 minutes left.
Yeah, we got 3 minutes left.
3 people in.
Hey guys, how are you? Thanks for having me up.
Good, thanks for listening.
Yeah, no problem. Look, I'm a political scientist up here in Canada. I've been studying a UBI, or any sort of basic income for that matter, since 2013. So I'm obviously overwhelming support of it, and I've done tons of videos and research and stuff on it. And I just wanted to share, thank you guys for the work you guys do, because it's helped me a lot on my content that I've put out, and been able to find resources and information, because in here in Canada we are going through a process right now of potentially getting some sort of basic income here over the next few years, which is super exciting to see that the political willpower up here is shifting, especially in the world. towards supporting this idea. Where 10 years ago, I would have said you're crazy for even thinking that being a thing. So I just wanted to ask, because I'm actually been asked to participate and give a TED talk here in Canada in May about a basic income. So can I reach out to you guys for advice on how to talk about this stuff? Because I'm kind of
Of course.
stumped on the path I want to go forward with it, because it's like I want to kind of hint on the fact that many people are saying this is sort of like a utopian idea, but we've gone
Mhm.
through utopian ideas in the past, right? Like when we talk about, equal rights and women's suffrage and ending slavery and stuff like that. These were all ideas
Mhm.
back then that were viewed as, no, this is crazy. It's going to kill our economy. It's going to do this, that, and the other, right? So it's just it's very overwhelming to say, hey, you're going to go on a stage with thousands of people about this thing that you do, but um, I'm kind of just stuck. I'm working with the UBI Works guys quite extensively, right? I've talked to Floyd and the crew there, but
Mhm.
Yeah,
it's regardless of that, it's a pretty exciting time for us up here, right? Because we are going through this
Mhm.
process,
that's cool to
and
hear.
it's looking like it's probably just going to be a GBI, but I mean, in my opinion, any basic income is a step forward, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I just have one quick thought about that. Just at any time I hear it's a utopian idea, and I don't know if you've read Rutger Bregman's stuff. I think he talks about this sometimes too. I mean, he's got a book, Utopia for Realists. Um,
Mm,
my main thing that I come back with is utopia is not a destination. It's a direction. It's like a
right.
more in the direction. There is, you sound naive when you talk about a utopia, because with the implication that this is where we want to get to, because there's, human nature and progress is all about growth in a direction, making things a little bit better. So a
Yeah.
utopian idea is, how do we get more in the direction of justice, of fairness, of harmony in society, and that's what a utopian idea is. It's not like a we all land in heaven and eat gumdrops all day sort of situation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a horizon that we'll never reach. It's like you always aim for the horizon, you walk towards it, but in the act of doing so, you find what the next thing is. But like you don't not step forward because you feel you never reach the horizon. It doesn't make any sense. You gotta.
Yeah, and like we're in a kind of unique position up here in Canada because during COVID we did launch the Canadian Economic Recovery Benefit, which was what
Mhm.
one would argue is a form of a basic income, albeit it was it was additional, so it's not exactly fully a basic income, but it did put the idea in people's heads that the government does have the ability and the finances to just give people money, right, every
Right.
month, in a way that was done very efficiently. Now, the failure of the benefit wasn't that we were giving people money. The failure was with how it was administered, right? So it was administered very poorly. So that's why it was such a fiasco, and people are having to pay back money that they shouldn't have got, and this and that. And that's kind of the idea here that I'm trying to run with is like, look, SERP was cool, but imagine if we took away the conditions of it, right? And so you didn't have to be chased to get back the $2,000 a month or whatever. And that's kind of what's sticking in people's heads
Yeah.
because that's fresh. Like that's less than 2 years ago, right? We know
Yeah.
we could do this, and we know we could pay it because yes, we could go into deficit and debt doing it, but we as a country were one of the best bounce backs out of any of the G7 nations, right? So it
Yeah.
works. Like it works for an economic perspective, right? Especially when times are tough. So
Yeah, it's frustrating how much overlap there is between the pandemic responses in both Canada and the U.S. in like similarities to basic income and also differences to basic income. Like I find myself constantly like having to explain both how they helped out and they were necessary, and outcomes were better because we did them. But at the same time, we could have done them much better.
yeah,
And that's the explaining like the difference then. So like when it comes to CERB, it's like it was entirely possible for someone getting 2,000 a month on CERB to
mm-hmm.
be offered a job that paid $1,500 per month, and like why would you take that?
Right.
And of course, some people did because they knew the CERB was temporary, but like also that's where you need to explain the difference between those is because with the basic income, you were always better off. And with CERB, you weren't. Same thing with the boosted unemployment system
Yeah.
in the US. And at the same time, the boosted unemployment system and CERB, I believe too, like reached gig workers better than, unemployment as it currently exists. So
Yeah.
that shows how like the failures of the current system and how they could be better. But yes, they could be even better.
Yeah, and what I'll say too, with CRB, as somebody who had to claim CRB in almost a very urgent state when I was laid off from COVID, um, it was administered and completed and distributed in 4 days from the announcement to money in bank accounts,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah,
that
very
is an
quick.
incredibly quick process for any bureaucratical system to distribute that money in 4 days' time, right? So and that's kind of what I tell the people is when it got revamped into the CRB, which is still ongoing to this day, it's a much better system because it's done through the unemployment system and it's administered properly and people aren't having to be clawed back. But yeah, I mean it's we're in a very unique position of being there, and I'm excited to see where this basic income bill, this framework bill, is being pushed to the government right now. It is
Hmm.
being seemingly bipartisan support, which is just astonishing to think of, right? That
Hmm.
every party of our 6 federal parties is like, yeah, let's do this. Let's go through it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which is, I've never seen that in my 33 years of life. And since I've been studying politics since 2008, I've never seen it in this country. So it's exciting. It's exciting
Yeah.
to see where it goes.
Well,
So,
you're welcome to reach out to any of us. My
oh,
main thing is my main thing is
I definitely will.
my my instinct with something like a TED Talk or that format is like you want to balance between like the bigger philosophical pictures and things like that, and the macroeconomic effects. Is
Mm-hmm.
you need to, or it'll behoove you to drill down in some specific human stories, like a few case studies. If you're comparing
Yeah.
CERB with imagine what it would look like if, then you have to walk someone through someone's day of like dealing with the pitfalls of CERB or
Yeah.
welfare as it is, and give them a name, whatever, make it a real person. But just something that allows people to really feel like they're there rather than thinking about the general efficiency of a program. You need
Yeah.
you need both.
Yeah, the theme of the TED event is actually Imagine If, right? So there's a bunch of different
Hmm.
speakers talking about different programs and stuff that we could do to better our society here in Canada. So this is kind of the one thing because basic income is all the talk right now up here with this kind of
Hmm.
stuff. So it's exciting. So I'll definitely be reaching out because as I start to write this and get it going, I need resources because everything needs to be vetted and checked and fact checked, right? So I'll definitely be reaching out if that's okay with you guys because
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
our
of
power in
course.
numbers, right?
Happy to
So
help.
all right, I'll
Yeah,
drop down, but thanks for having me up and take care.
thank
Yeah, you
you.
bet.
I'm just worried Canada's going to have UBI, and it's going to be just another one of those things like healthcare and gun control that the U.S. is just like looking at, saying, "Why can't we be more like that?" So, I
Yeah,
hope
yeah.
not.
The fact that they already have their child benefit, which is
Right.
like they're already getting money to so many families. It basically it's like we could have been first with Nixon's family assistance plan, and that's essentially what Canada has now. But like
Yeah.
we were actually like decades ahead, and could have been, but we didn't. And so like I feel that's the kind of thing that we seem to have gotten good at, where we used to want to be first, and
Right. But
now
now,
we don't.
Canada's like, we look at things that are Canadian and be like, well, that's just a Canadian
Right,
thing.
right.
Like,
If
we
it
don't
works
want to do
out, yeah, that's
that.
just Canada. Of course, it
Right.
works
Or,
That's
there.
just them doing
or
their
if it gets bad
Canadian
enough, I'll
stuff.
move
Like,
there. I mean, and, I'm like 4 hours from the border, and it's like it's my patriotic stubbornness that's like, no, I got to make it happen here, otherwise I'm letting everyone down. But then it's like it is tempting.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're already over, and so let's go ahead and wrap this up. Sorry for those who are still listening, who want to step up and ask questions and whatnot. But we're here, every Wednesday. We aim for 12 p.m. Eastern, just like this, and each episode we eventually get onto YouTube. Not like super fast, but they do end up on YouTube, so you can go to YouTube, the Comingle channel, and find each and every space we've done prior to this. So yeah, they may be interested in some of those topics and guests that already had so far. And yeah, thanks all
Well,
for joining us
let me
today.
throw in the quick plugs at the end since we have a lot more people
Yeah.
now. But I put in a comment that says other ways to get involved and where to follow us on social media, YouTube channel. Our Indiegogo campaign still open. We're still raising money, but we're more raising people. We're trying to get as many backers as possible. And then our websites. So if you want to follow along or keep coming on Wednesdays, yeah, check that stuff out.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, and if you've got a question that we didn't get to, just try to leave it in the comments and we can probably answer it there too.
All right. Thanks, Conrad. Thanks, Josh. And thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
listening. We will see you next week, hopefully.
All right. See you guys
All
later.
right. Bye now.
Bye.